il verbo me garbatum est. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tui mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
He suffered at the hands of some popes of the 20th century who were given bad information about him. He had enemies who were jealous of him, local bishops and cardinals, priests, religious. Unfortunately, the popes didn't always get an accurate appraisal of Padre Pio. And so he was put under house arrest for a few years. He couldn't publicly say Mass. He couldn't hear confessions. And then happily, all those restrictions were lifted. He was an obedient son of the church who went back to his ministry for souls, hearing confession hours and hours every day, like St. John Vianney. His public Mass began very, very early in the morning. There was always a crowd outside before they even opened the church. He would conduct spiritual direction by mail through his letters to various souls that he had kept in contact with over the years. So Padre Pio had a great love for Peter, but especially manifested after St. Paul VI, in 1968, it was July, put out the encyclical, very controversial, Humanae Vitae, on the regulation of births, on human life. And the Pope was being crucified because of his fidelity to Catholic doctrine. Padre Pio, one of his last acts was to write a letter offering himself for the Pope, for the Church, and maintaining his fidelity in all things to the Vicar of Christ. That was in July, and by September 23rd, a few months later, he was dead. He passed out of this world. His death was beautiful. He was conscious to the very end. He renewed his vows as a Capuchin friar. He received the last sacraments of the Church, and he died in his chair in that room where I visited several times, with the final words on his lips, Jesu, Maria, Jesus, and Mary. And his funeral was attended by thousands. Multitudes came to his funeral. And then, after a time, they began the process for beatification and canonization. When they opened his tomb, which is commonplace for a beatification, to get relics and so forth, and identify the body, he was found to be basically incorrupt. There was some mold on the skin, but they were able to cleanse those areas. He has very thick makeup, so he looks like he did the moment he died. But his body is intact. The corruption of the grave has not taken him. And very often they have his body in this crystal coffin for the faithful to venerate. In fact, Pope Francis had his body brought to the Vatican and venerated St. Padre Pio there in St. Peter's. So it's an extraordinary thing to see the mortal remains of St. Padre Pio. So that's why he's a saint, not because of mystical gifts, but because of his fidelity and his love for Jesus, Mary, and Peter.